Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Goff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 14 must-start players for the 2022 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about 4 must-start prospects that over the course of this week, I've heard a lot of questions in regards to. Whether it's via the comment section, the live streams, even the Discord channel, I've seen a lot of questions in regards to these 4 prospects. So I want to go ahead and give you guys a little bit more of an expanded explanation as to why I believe they are must-start prospects and why I have them as highly ranked as I do going into this given week. Giving you guys my opinions and the statistics that justify the reasons as to why these are must-start players going into the given week. After we talk about these must-start players going into week 14, we'll go ahead and put together some prize pick entries at the end of today's episode. Again, do not forget, for those of you who have not heard, going into this week, PrizePicks has a free square entry in regards to Justin Herbert 0.5 passing yards. Again, you're picking more or less on given player statistics, and we're going to go ahead and put together a couple prize pick entries for this weekend. You can go ahead and do yourself a favor, sign up today using promo code Andrew, because when you use that promo code, it immediately doubles your first time deposit up to $100. You can go ahead and put together some entries via the NFL for this upcoming weekend, including Justin Herbert or other sports, esports, all of that encompassed via PrizePicks. So go ahead and check that out today. Link in the description. We'll go ahead and refer back to a couple entries after we cover the must-start players at the end of the video. Thank you very much. All right. Now, tomorrow, do not forget, we will have a live stream from 1 to 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Also, we'll be live streaming on Sunday morning from 8 to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So if you guys want some questions answered, you can go ahead and stop by then. If you guys have not yet already, be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on my latest content. Of course, if you have not yet already, please click the bell notification button because that lets you know exactly when I am live streaming and available to go and when my latest content has been posted. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's get into talking about some Week 14 must-start prospects. Some of these guys that, yes, over the course of the week, I talked about for maybe a minute and a half tops when I went over them in my rankings videos. But I want to get a little bit of an extended dialogue in regards to some of the information I've collected on these players and what makes them must-start prospects in the given week. We're going to begin with Zonovan Knight. Again, I had him really highly ranked going into Tuesday's rankings video at the running back position. And even with Michael Carter set to potentially play this upcoming weekend, I am still all in on Zonovan Knight because he's passed the eye test for me. Now, over the course of the last 2 weeks, he's produced some really good numbers, 11.8 and 14.3 half PPR fantasy points. Against the Chicago Bears, 14 rushing attempts, 3 receptions. Against the Minnesota Vikings the week after, 15 rushing attempts, 5 receptions, a boatload of carries, and in both overall weeks was able to surpass 100 total offensive yards, which is an incredible contribution from a rookie running back, which many of us didn't even know the name of just a couple weeks ago. And because of the efforts of Zonovan Knight, he's gone ahead and established himself a position in this backfield, obviously, as late because of the injury that Michael Carter sustained. But going forward, I expect Zonovan Knight, and so does Robert Saleh, to be a mainstay in this backfield. Let's talk about this. Michael Carter in his entire career, even going back to college, has never been the primary RB1 of a team, and neither have his coaches wanted him to be. You go back to UNC, his days where he was splitting touches and carries with Javonte Williams. Of course, now the Denver Broncos running back. Now at UNC, he was primarily the RB2. Yes, he got his fair share of touches, but ultimately Javonte Williams was the number 1. Now going into the NFL, once he was drafted his rookie year 2021, he split carries with Ty Johnson, Tevin Coleman early on. Eventually, Tevin Coleman disappeared in that backfield, and it was a Ty Johnson-Michael Carter split. Now, the reason why they never wanted him to carry this backfield by himself on his shoulders alone is because, again, the workload is a lot for one singular running back, and can they sustain it? Obviously, his rookie year got injured when he was given that full workload. And going into his second season, the Jets making it a point as a coaching staff and as an organization to trade up in the second round, just a couple picks to ensure that they got the talent of Breece Hall. Breece Hall came in, became the RB1. That was an automatic. And even after Breece Hall went down, they immediately made a trade for James Robinson to come into this organization in order to impede Michael Carter from being that full workload guy because they know he can't do it. So as we progressed and saw James Robinson pretty much being filtered out of this lineup, and Zonovan Knight, a special teams primary player, getting more and more touches, and even in that first drive against the Chicago Bears in Week 12, in which Michael Carter was still healthy, he was getting himself touches out of this backfield. I'm still expecting Zonovan Knight to get a lot of touches out of this backfield. And you don't even just have to hear it from me. You could just hear it from, Robert Saleh, the head coach of this football team. In a press conference done on December 7th, he was asked on multiple occasions about Michael Carter. He said Michael Carter is going to be back. Then he was subsequently asked questions about Zonovan Knight. And he spoke glowingly about him, speaking to Zonovan's aggressiveness as a runner, talking about when he puts his foot in the ground and cuts back in, special things happen. He was very excited about the potential of Zonovan Knight going forward. And not only that, when a reporter asked him, has Zonovan earned a piece of the pie in this backfield? He was quoted to have said, he's not going anywhere. So I expect to see Zonovan Knight get himself a lot of touches going forward, and especially in this upcoming weekend's matchup against the Buffalo Bills, a lot of opportunity is on hand. Let's primarily talk about the weather in this current situation. The Buffalo Bills game currently is projected to about 9 to 10 mile per hour winds with potential chance of light snow. And if that's going to be the case, this could be a game that goes immediately to the ground and is a running attack from the New York Jets. Even though they want to throw the ball a lot with Mike White, they may be forced to go ahead and run the ball. And if they're going to have to do so, why not? The Buffalo Bills since week 7 have been giving up 5.05 yards per carry on average, have been giving up 110 rushing yards per game to opposing running backs, and 0.5 rushing touchdowns per game to opposing running backs. Incredible statistics across the board. And not only have they been giving up a lot of points on the ground, there's a potential in which Mike White, because of the weather, is going to be checking it down to running backs. Over the course of Mike White's career, in the 5 full games that he has played, he has averaged targeting his running backs 14 times per game, which have led to 11 receptions and 99 receiving yards per game. Incredible statistics. And going into this upcoming week, whether it's on the ground or through the year, I absolutely believe that Zonovan Knight can be an immediate option for us to start in our rosters as an RB2 going into the week. Now, best case scenario, yes, he could be started in all formats. Worst case scenario, he's a PPR only play because of that receiving upside that he's going to have. Let's say, for example, his 15 rushing attempts, the total 20 rushing attempts that they had last week increases because of the weather. It goes to 25. If we're going to see Zonovan Knight carry the ball 12 to 13 times in a game, also getting himself the ample amount of 3 to 5 potential receptions in a contest, by all means, there's a lot of opportunity there for him to not only be a working back in terms of someone who can get a lot of yardage, but someone who could also get himself goal line opportunities. Do not forget, last week against the Minnesota Vikings, had 3 red zone rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line. Obviously, his offensive line could not help him in a lot of those categories, but you never know. He could continue to be that goal line back going forward. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next running back I wanted to talk about. It is D'Onta Foreman of the Carolina Panthers, the thumbnail for today's episode. D'Onta Foreman is in a position going up against the Seattle Seahawks where it should be automatic success. But again, we wouldn't be so confident about D'Onta Foreman if he hadn't shown us promising play on the field. And that's what I'm going to bank on. In 4 out of the last 6 games that D'Onta Foreman has participated in, he has produced 113 or more receiving yards. That's 4 out of the last 6 games. And in those 4 games, 4 rushing touchdowns. Pretty good overall statistics for a guy like D'Onta Foreman. Now, his fantasy finishes within those weeks, 13, 5, 9, and 27. So going into this week, against an advantageous matchup like the Seattle Seahawks, in my mind, he's an automatic top 24, if not better, getting into that top 15 conversation because of the amount of potential that he has up against this defense. Now, let's talk about this defense in specific. The Seattle Seahawks run defense are the 5th best matchup since week 7, giving up themselves 654 total rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns to opposing running backs, which is a total of 107.4 fantasy points, which is 17.9 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs over that 6-game span. So that's 109 rushing yards per game and 1.17 rushing touchdowns per game and a 4.61 yard per carry average. I know it's a lot of numbers, but these are all positives. These are all great numbers that you can go ahead and bank on in regards to the potential of a D'Onta Foreman. Now let's go ahead and expand upon the Seattle Seahawks run-stop defense. In the last 4 games that they have played against, they've obviously been torched by guys like Cam Akers, went for 18.5 fantasy points, Josh Jacobs, 45.3 fantasy points, even Rachaad White, 10.5 fantasy points, and Leonard Fournette, 11.3. Incredible performances by all 4 backs. Obviously, the one highlighted by Josh Jacobs, where he scored that walk-off touchdown in overtime. But in those last 4 games, as a defense, in terms of run stopping, they've been allowing 1.68 yards before contact and 3.56 yards per carry after contact. Now, I don't just highlight those statistics just to talk about them blindly, but I also want to correlate that in regards to what we've seen D'Onta Foreman produce since week 7. Since he's been an active participant in this backfield, since this team traded away Christian McCaffrey, we have seen D'Onta Foreman run the ball with a 1.44 yard before contact per attempt average, which again is a really good number. And on top of that, has seen a 3.18 yard after contact per rush. Again, in my opinion, going up against this advantageous matchup, D'Onta Foreman should be unlocked. And I understand there is going to be the potential of Chuba Hubbard getting himself some touches out of this backfield, but I think as an offense as a whole, with Sam Darnold there, they have far more potential for success moving the chains and, of course, going up against a defense that cannot stop a soul in the running game. Let's move on to the next option we wanted to mention. It is Jeff Wilson Jr. We've heard a lot of conversations about Jeff Wilson Jr. and a lot of questions have been posed in my direction because he put up a whopping 0.7 half PPR fantasy points last week. 0.7. An unbelievably unexpected but brutal performance. But was it really unexpected? I mean, he went up against the San Francisco 49ers defense. They are the best run-stopping defense over the course of the last 2 months now. And they've not only been stopping opposing running backs, but stuffing them at the point of attack. Really just making a lot of plays on the ball and just forcing teams to have to pass. And quite frankly, that's what we've witnessed. That's the reason why, that secondary is such an advantageous matchup for wide receivers, because teams have gone ahead and just abandoned the run against the San Francisco 49ers. Again, yes, it was his former team, and we were thinking a revenge game could potentially come about. But with Teron Armstead out and Austin Jackson out, both of these starting offensive tackles for the Miami Dolphins, they really didn't have much of a choice but to have to pass the ball. A lot of turnovers took place. And yes, Mike McDaniels, after that game, came out and said that he regretted not running the ball more. But quite frankly, it was an impossible situation there to run the ball. But going into this week, we have the complete opposite. You go from one of the toughest matchups, if not the toughest matchup at the running back position in terms of running the ball, to the easiest, going up against the Los Angeles Chargers defense that over the course of the last 2 years have been in this exact same position, giving up the most points to opposing running backs. You can go back to last season, 2021. They have been awful at stopping the run at all capacities, and it's not stopping anytime soon. So I absolutely believe that we're going to get a potential in which Teron Armstead comes back. You sign Eric Fisher. He could potentially get into that rotation as a swing tackle. And then you go ahead and just run the ball all over this defense. Now, in weeks 9 and 10, when Jeff Wilson Jr. first was introduced to this team, he was the primary back, not only out snapping, out carrying, and out targeting Raheem Mostert, but the guy was playing 54% of the snaps, was averaging 13 carries, 85 rushing yards per game, 0.5 rushing touchdowns, 0.5 receiving touchdowns, so pretty much a touchdown per game, 4 targets per game, and 18 fantasy points per game. Incredible numbers across the board. Now, if we can get back to those numbers, which I fully expect to do so, we're going to be in a situation going up against the Los Angeles Chargers, who have given up, in the last 6 games alone, 925 rushing yards on 170 attempts, 6 rushing touchdowns, which again is 154 rushing yards per game, 1 rushing touchdown per game, and a 5.44 yard per carry average to opposing running backs in that 6-week span. Incredible numbers in a fantastic matchup, which all leads to a 21.42 fantasy point per game average to opposing running backs. Incredible numbers. So going into this week, what do we expect? A lot of success, in fact. And we even heard it in last night's broadcast when they were talking about Josh Jacobs going up against the Rams. And again, Baker Mayfield clutched out. But when they were going up against the Rams early in that game, the broadcast even said in week 13 against the Los Angeles Chargers, Josh Jacobs did not have a single negative yard rushing attempt. Yes, he had a couple attempts that were for no gain, but not once was he caught in the backfield. There is a lot of potential here in which we can get an incredible performance, not only out of a guy like Jeff Wilson Jr., but perhaps even Raheem Mostert going into this week. Again, just looking at some of the recent performances against this defense, besides guys like Josh Jacobs, who went for 144 rushing yards, James Conner 120, Isaiah Pacheco 107, Elijah Mitchell as a RB2 on his team, 89 rushing yards, Tyler Algier as the RB2 on his team, 99 rushing yards, and Kenneth Walker for 167. Incredible numbers from running backs, whether they're the number 1 or the number 2 of their own team. Incredible numbers across the board. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the final prospect I wanted to mention. It is Jared Goff. Jared Goff has the privilege of taking on the Minnesota Vikings defense. Now, in the last 2 weeks, Jared Goff has played very good football, and he's thrown the ball a lot. 37 times and 41 times. Those amount of attempts, I mean, he hadn't seen that number since week 8. It has been quite a while since they allowed Jared Goff to just sling the rock, and has been able to put up great numbers, 240 passing yards and 2 touchdowns, and 340 passing yards and 2 touchdowns, 17.6 and 20.6 fantasy points in each of the last 2 games. Now he has the privilege of taking on a secondary and a defensive matchup in which, quite frankly, is extremely advantageous. It is the 4th best matchup at the quarterback position in terms of points allowed since week 7, and it is the number 1 overall matchup in terms of points allowed since week 7 to opposing wide receivers, which of course is primarily where we're going to see a lot of Jared Goff's value be attributed to. Let's not forget, quarterbacks against this defense have torched them since week 7. Let's put up a couple of the numbers in terms of how many passing yards they've allowed. Mike White, 369. Mac Jones, 382. Dak Prescott, even though it was a blowout, 276. Josh Allen, 330. Kyler Murray, 326. And Teddy Bridgewater, 329. Incredible numbers across the damn board. And not only have these quarterbacks been able to put up incredible numbers through the passing game, but they've been able to put up fantasy points, 17.4 plus fantasy points to each of these quarterbacks. Specific numbers, 17.46, 23.28, 20.64, 19.6, 24.64, and 18.16. This is an automatic must play. There's a reason why I have Jared Goff ranked as high as I do. And for those of you who only heard me talk about him in that Thursday episode for maybe 30 seconds max, This gives you a little bit more of an idea as to why we have to play him. Again, with Jamison Williams in the lineup, with DJ Chark in the lineup healthy, with Josh Reynolds there. Of course, DeAndre Swift looking like his former self. I mean, again, let's not forget, DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams in the last couple weeks now consecutively have both been able to score rushing touchdowns each. Not only have they been incredible in terms of the running game, it is opening up the passing game and the play action scheme for this Detroit Lions offense. But you got to remember, the last time that Jared Goff took on this Minnesota Vikings defense, he didn't have the services of DeAndre Swift or DJ Chark, both of them getting injured in that game. He didn't have Jamison Williams active. Khalif Raymond wasn't as big of an option. Amon-Ra St. Brown and TJ Hawkinson in those weeks were pedestrian. Overall, we saw lackluster performances and still a pretty good game from Jared Goff in that overall performance, which I only believe he is going to expand upon going into week 14 in a must-win contest against his division rival. Let's not also forget that when we talk about DeAndre Swift, in the last 2 weeks, the reason why I say he's come back to his former self, 14 targets in the last 2 games. I mean, that's second only to Amon-Ra St. Brown over the last 2 weeks, which has got himself 22 targets. He's in that conversation of being the primary receiving threat outside of Amon-Ra in this offense. And even guys like Justin Jackson in this backfield are getting themselves targets to the point where even if this deep passing game isn't able to flourish in this upcoming weekend's matchup, we know that the check down is going to be there. He can put the ball into playmakers' hands and they're going to make plays like we have seen DeAndre Swift do for over his entire career when healthy and ready to go. Either way, I believe Jared Goff is a must-start going into the week, and that gives you guys a little bit of an idea as to why I'm playing him in every opportunity I have going into this weekend's matchup. Of course, ranking subjects change. We'll talk about specific rankings on Sunday morning. Be sure to go ahead and click that bell notification button and tune in from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Sunday morning to get those rankings. All right, that's going to cover it in terms of must-start players. Let's go ahead and let's close out today's episode by putting together some PrizePick entries. Again, do not forget, going into this weekend. Again, there's 48 hours remaining in which you can go ahead and put together an entry in regards to Justin Herbert going more than 0.5 passing yards. Do not let this opportunity slip through your fingers. Go ahead, click the link down in the description, travel to their website via PrizePicks, and use promo code Andrew today to sign up and make a first-time deposit, because when you make that first-time deposit, it's immediately doubled up to $100. You can take advantage and put together some potential entries going into the week. Speaking of entries, let's go ahead and let me present to you guys a couple of the entries that I am putting forth going into this weekend's PrizePicks. All right, so as you can see to the right of me, we are here via PrizePicks, whether it is the NFL, NHL, NBA, CSGO. I mean, there's esports. Again, you guys know I like to play my fair share of games. The MMA. I mean, again, there's MMA fights tomorrow. You can go ahead, put together some entries. NHL. I mean, I don't really know much about NHL, but hey, you might be a genius and be able to put together some potential entries for the given week. But let's go ahead and let's talk about the realm of football, talking about whether it's passing yards, rushing yards, receiving yards, putting together entries for this given week. We want to go ahead and put a couple themes to the entries that we put forth, similar to the way that we did last week. We're going to go ahead and put together our must-starts of the given week. First and foremost, we begin with D'Onta Foreman. Again, 55.5 rushing yards. Like I mentioned, he's been able to surpass 113 in 4 out of his last 6 games. This is an automatic more play on the given week, picking more or less on given statistics. I think D'Onta Foreman should absolutely be able to crush this number. Was not mentioned on the injury report on Friday, got himself a full designated practice and should be a full go against the Seattle Seahawks defense. The next player that we want to, of course, talk about is, when we go and search in the search bar, is perhaps Jared Goff. Let's talk about Jared Goff. We just mentioned him just moments ago in regards to obviously being a must start. But where do we want to potentially play his efforts going into the week? I believe it should be in fantasy points. The Minnesota Vikings defense have given up their fair share of yardage and fantasy points like we went over individually going into the week. This is an automatic more play, picking his overall number. We're going to go ahead and adjust this entry real quick. But what I also want to do is add another potential must-start player, which in this certain circumstance will be Jeff Wilson Jr. Jeff Wilson Jr. has been gave up upon by everyone. And I put Jeff, but hey, Justin Jefferson's got some pretty good numbers himself. I think honestly should be able to surpass these numbers. But either way, let's talk about Jeff Wilson Jr. 40.5 rushing yards against the Chargers of all defenses. Again, they're giving up 151 rushing yards per game since week 7. This is an automatic more play. We'll go ahead, we'll put together our specific PrizePick entries for this week. D'Onta Foreman, Jared Goff, Jeff Wilson as our must-start players of the week. We'll go ahead and place this entry right now and move on to the next entry for this week. Now, the second entry I'm going ahead and putting together for the NFL weekend is called We Play Against Houston. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, that means we are playing players specifically that are going up against Houston. And in terms of fantasy points scored, I really want to go after guys like Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott and absolutely start them. 15.5 fantasy points, 14.5 fantasy points. I think both those numbers are extremely achievable. I mean, look at Zeke's last 5 consecutive games. Easily able to surpass that number, finding the end zone 7 times in those last 5 contests. Of course, Tony Pollard, you know he's got the home run hitting ability. He's been able to surpass this number in quite a lot of games. And in the only game he wasn't able to do so was only able to gather 60 yards in a short week on a Thursday game. I'm expecting, of course, Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott to both be able to easily surpass this number going into the given week. Both of them more entries on the given week. Now, considering you can't put in an entry that only has one singular team, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add the Jared Goff going more than 16 fantasy points to this and go ahead and put this entry and move on to the next one. All right, the final entry for week 14 is a negative one. I typically don't want to pick less on given player statistics, but we're going to go ahead and say this is the good luck next time entry. At this current moment, we're going less on Deshaun Watson, 17.0 fantasy points. We're going to go less there. And we're also going to add another player to this list, which is another quarterback who, as of late, quite frankly, has been struggling. Let's go ahead. Let's travel to the bottom. And let's ride Russell Wilson. We're going to go ahead and pick less than 14.5 fantasy points there. Again, the last 3 consecutive has not played well, has not been able to figure it out. With Cortland Sutton out this week, I think this is a game in which he's definitely going to struggle. And when we talk about Deshaun Watson, who quite literally only scored 5 points, I think it was, 5 points last week? I mean, an unbelievably brutal performance. He's not going to be putting up these incredible numbers for quite some time. You know, obviously trying to find his footing within this offense and going into this week. So we're going to go ahead and close out with this final entry. And that's going to cover it for us today. Again, thank you everybody for watching. Again, if you have not yet already, this is the entry you want to go ahead and take advantage of going into the week. 0.5 passing yards via the one and only Justin Herbert. You pick more on that, accompany that with a couple other entries, whether it is the NBA, the NHL, the NFL going into this upcoming weekend, whether it's sacks, rushing attempts, interceptions, all of the above, you can go ahead and take advantage of going into this weekend. Even first half numbers. If you want to go ahead and play first half numbers, you feel like a player is going to have themselves an incredible first half, or they start slow and they don't score a lot of points in the first half, you could take advantage of that going into this weekend. Thank you everybody for watching. Be sure to use promo code Andrew. And until tomorrow, we'll be live streaming, and Sunday, I'll see you guys. Peace.